Thank you for joining my ASMR channel, and today we will be reading chapter 6, chapter 6 of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, which is book 1 in the series. Chapter 6 is called, I Became a Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. Once I got over the fact that my Latin teacher was a horse, we had a nice tour, though I was careful not to walk behind him. I'd done Pooper Scooper Patrol in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade a few times, and I'm sorry, I did not trust Chiron's back end the way I trusted his front. We passed the volleyball pit. Several of the campers nudged each other, pointing to the Minotaur horn I was carrying, and said, "That's him." Most of the campers were older than me. Their satyr friends were bigger than Grover, all of them trotting around in an orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirts, with nothing else to cover their bare, shaggy hindquarters. I wasn't normally shy, but the way they stared at me made me feel uncomfortable. I felt like they were expecting me to do a flip or something. I looked back at the farmhouse, and it was a lot bigger than I realized. 4 stories tall, sky blue with white trim, like an upscale seaside resort. I was checking out the brass eco-weather vane on top when something caught my eye, a shadow in the uppermost window of the attic gable. Something had moved in the curtain just for a second, and I got a distinct impression I was being watched. "What's up there?" I asked Chiron. He looked where I was pointing, and the smile faded. "Just the attic." "Somebody lives there?" "No," he said with finality. "Not a single living thing." I got the feeling he was being truthful, but I also was sure I saw something move behind that curtain. "Come along, Percy," Chiron said, his light-hearted tone now a little forced. "Lots to see." We walked through the strawberry fields where the campers were picking bushels of berries, where the satyrs played the same tune on a reed pipe. Chiron told me that the camp grew a nice crop for exports to New York restaurants and Mount Olympus. "It pays our expenses," he explained, "and the strawberries take almost no effort." He said Mr. D had this effect on fruit-bearing plants. They just went crazy when he was around. It worked best with wine grapes, but Mr. D was restricted from growing them, so they had to grow strawberries instead. I watched a satyr playing his pipe. His music was causing lines of bugs to leave the strawberry patch in every direction, like refugees fleeing from a fire. I wonder if Grover could work that kind of magic with music. I wonder if he was still inside the farmhouse getting chewed out by Mr. D. "Grover won't get in too much trouble, will he?" I asked. "I mean, he was a good protector." "Really?" Chiron sighed. He shed his tweed jacket and draped it over his horse's back like a saddle. "Grover had big dreams, Percy. Perhaps bigger than are reasonable. To reach his goal, he must first demonstrate the great courage by succeeding as a keeper, finding a new camper and bringing him safely to Half-Blood Hill. But he did that." "I might agree with you," Chiron said, "but it is not in my place to judge. Dionysus and the Council of Cloven Elders must decide. I'm afraid they might not see this assignment as a success. After all, Grover lost you in New York, and then there's that unfortunate fate of your mother, and the fact that Grover was unconscious when you dragged him over the property line. The council might question whether this shows any courage on Grover's part." I wanted to protest. None of what happened was Grover's fault. I also felt really, really guilty. If I hadn't given Grover the slip at the bus station, he might not have gotten in trouble. "He'll get a second chance, won't he?" Chiron winced. "I'm afraid that was Grover's second chance, Percy." The council was not anxious to give him another either. After what happened the first time 5 years ago, Olympus knows. I advise him to wait longer before trying again. He's still so small for his age. How old is he? Oh, 28. What? And he's in the 6th grade? Satyrs mature fast as humans, Percy. Grover has the equivalent of a middle school student for the past 6 years. That's horrible. Quite, Chiron agreed. At any rate, Grover is a late bloomer, even a satyr by standards, and not yet very accomplished at woodland magic. At last, he was anxious to pursue his dream. Perhaps now he will find some other career. That's not fair, I said. What happened to the first time? Was it really so bad? Chiron looked away quickly. Let's move along, shall we? But I wasn't quite ready to let the subject drop. Something had occurred to me when Chiron talked about my mother's fate, as if he were intentionally avoiding the word death. The beginnings of an idea, a tiny hopeful fire, started to form in my mind. Chiron, I said, if gods and Olympus and all of that are real, yes, child, does that mean the underworld is real too? Chiron's expression darkened. Yes, child. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. There is a place where spirits go after death, but for now, until we know more, I urge you to put that out of your mind. What do you mean, until we know more? Come, Percy, let's see the woods. As we got closer, I realized how huge the forest was. It took up at least a quarter of the valley, with trees so tall, thick. You could imagine nobody had been there since Native Americans. Chiron said, the woods are stocked, if you care to try your luck, but go armed. Stocked with what? I asked. Armed with what? You'll see. Capture the flag is Friday night. Do you have your own sword and shield? My own... No, Chiron said. I don't suppose you do. I think a size 5 would do. I'll visit the armory later. I wanted to ask what kind of summer camp had an armory, but there was too much else to think about, so the tour continued. We saw the archery range, the canoeing lake, the stables, which Chiron didn't seem to like very much, the javelin range, and the sing-along amphitheater, and the arena where Chiron said that they held sword and spear fights. Sword and spear fights? I asked. Cabin challenges and all of that, he explained. Not lethal, usually. Oh, yes, and there's the mess hall. Chiron pointed to the outdoor pavilion framed in white Greek-iron columns on a hill overlooking the sea. There was a dozen stone picnic tables, no roofs, no walls. What do you do when it rains? Chiron looked at me as if I'd gone a little weird. We still have to eat, don't we? I decided to let the subject drop. Finally, he showed me the cabins, where there were 12 of them, nestled in the woods by the lake, which were in a range of a U, with 2 at the base, 5 in a row on either side, where they held about the most berserk collection of buildings I've ever seen. Except for the fact that each had a large brass number above the door, odds on the left side, evens on the right. They looked absolutely nothing alike. Number 9 had smokestacks and a tiny factory. Number 4 had tomato vines on the walls and a roof made of real grass. 7 seemed to be made of solid gold, which gleamed so much in the sunlight it was almost impossible to look at. They all faced a common area about the size of a soccer field, dotted with Greek statues, fountains, flower buds, and a couple other basketball hoops, which were more my speed. In the center of the field, there was a huge stone-lined fire pit. Even though it was a warm afternoon, the hearth smoldered. A girl about 9 years old was tending to the flames, poking in coals with a stick. The pair of cabins at the head of the field was number 1 and 2. Looked like his and hers mausoleums. Big white marble boxes with heavy columns in front. Cabin 1 was the biggest and bulkiest of the 12. It was polished bronze doors, shimmered like a hologram, so that different angles lightning bolts seemed to be striking across them. Cabin 2 was more graceful somehow, with a slimmer columns garlanded with pomegranates and flowers. The walls were carved with images of peacocks. Zeus and Hera? I asked. Correct. Their cabins looked pretty empty. Several of the cabins are, that's true. No one ever stays in 1 or 2. Okay, so each cabin has a different god, like a mascot. 12 cabins for the 12 Olympians, but why would some be empty? I stopped in front of the first cabin on the left, cabin 3. It wasn't high and mighty like 1, but long and low and solid. The outer walls were rough gray stone studded with pieces of seashell and coral, as if the slabs had been hewn straight from the bottom of the seafloor. I peeked inside the doorway, and Chiron said, "Oh, I wouldn't do that." Before he pulled me back, I caught the salty scent of the interior like the wind of the shore at Montauk. The interior walls glowed like a balloon. There were 6 empty bunk beds with silk sheets turned down. There was no sign anyone had slept there. The place felt so sad and lonely. I was glad that when Chiron put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Come along, Percy." Most of the other cabins were crowded with campers. Number 5 was bright red, a real nasty paint job, as if the color had been splashed on with buckets and fists. The roof was lined with barbed wire. A stuffed wild boar's head hung on the doorway. Its eyes seemed to follow me. Inside, I could see a bunch of mean-looking kids, both girls and boys, arm wrestling and arguing with each other while rock music blared. The loudest was the girl, maybe 13 or 14. She wore a size XXXL Camp Athletic t-shirt under a camouflage jacket. She zeroed in on me and gave me the evil stare. She reminded me of Nancy Boba Fett, though the camper girl was much bigger and tougher looking. Her hair was long and stringy and brown instead of red. I kept walking, trying to stay clear of Chiron's hooves. "We haven't seen any other centaurs," I observed. "No," he said sadly. "My kinsmen are a wild and barbaric folk. I'm afraid you might encounter them in the wilderness or at a major sporting event, but you won't see any here." "You said your name was Chiron. Are you really..." He smiled down at me. "The Chiron from the stories? Trainer of Hercules and all that?" "Yes, Percy, I am." "But shouldn't you be dead?" Chiron paused, as if the question intrigued him. "I honestly don't know what should be. The truth is, I can't be dead. You see, eons ago, the gods granted my wish. I could continue the work I loved. I could be a teacher of heroes as long as humanity needed me. I gained much from that wish, and I gave up much. But I'm still here, so I can only assume I'm still needed. I thought about being a teacher for 3,000 years. It wouldn't make the top 10 things for my wish list." "Doesn't it ever get boring?" No, he said. "Horribly depressing at sometimes, but never boring." "Why depressing?" Chiron seemed to turn hard after hearing again. "Oh, look," he said. "Annabeth is waiting for us." The blonde girl I'd met in the big house was reading a book in front of the last cabin on the left. 11 number. Oh my god. Number 11. When we reached her, she looked at me critically, like she'd still been thinking how much I drooled. I tried to see what she was reading, but I couldn't make out the title. I thought my dyslexia was acting up when I realized the title wasn't even English. The letters looked Greek to me. I mean, literally Greek. There were pictures of temples and statues in different kinds of columns, like those in an architecture book. "Annabeth," Chiron said, "I have master's archery class at noon. Would you take Percy from me?" "From here?" "Yes, sir. Cabin 11. Chiron told me, gesturing towards the doorway. "Make yourself at home." Out of all the cabins, 11 looked the most regular old summer camp cabin with the emphasis old. The threshold was worn down, the brown paint peeling. Over the doorway was one of those doctor symbols, a winged pole with 2 snakes wrapped around it. What did they call it again? A caduceus? Inside, it was packed with people, both boys and girls, way more than the number of bunk beds. Sleeping bags were spread around the floor. It looked like a gym where a Red Cross had set up in the evacuation center. Chiron didn't go in. The door was too low for him, but when the campers saw him, they immediately stood and bowed respectfully. "Well then," Chiron said, "good luck, Percy. I'll see you at dinner." He galloped away towards the archery range. I stood in the doorway looking at the kids. They weren't bowing anymore. They were staring at me, sizing me up. I knew this routine. I'd gone through it at enough schools. "Well," Annabeth prompted, "go on." So naturally, I tripped coming in the door, made a total fool of myself. There were some snickers from the from the campers, but none of them said anything. Annabeth announced, Percy Jackson, meet cabin 11. Regular or undetermined? Undetermined, somebody asked. I didn't know what to say, but Annabeth said, undetermined. Everybody groaned. A guy who was a little older than the rest of them. Now, campers, that's what we're here for. Come, Percy. You can have this spot on the floor right over there. The guy was about 19. He looked pretty cool. He was tall and muscular with short, cropped, sandy hair and a friendly smile. He wore an orange tank top, cut-offs, sandals, and a leather necklace with 5 different colored clay beads. The only thing unsettling about his appearance was the thick white scar that ran across from his right eye to his jaw like an old knife slash. This is Luke, Annabeth said. Her voice sounded different somehow. I glanced over and could have sworn she was blushing. She saw me looking and her expression hardened again. He's your counselor for now. For now, I asked. You're undetermined. Luke explained patiently. They don't know what cabin to put you in, so you're here. Cabin 11 takes on newcomers, all visitors. Naturally, we would. Hermes, our patron, is the god of travelers. I looked at the tiny section of the floor they'd given me. I had nothing to put there to mark that it was my own. No luggage, no clothes, no sleeping bag, just the Minotaur's horn. I thought about setting it down, but then I remembered the god Hermes was also the god of thieves. I looked around the camper's face, some sullen and suspicious, some grinning stupidly, some eyeing me as if they were waiting for a chance to pick my pockets. How long will I be here? I asked. Good question, Luke said. Until you're determined. How long would that take? All the campers laughed. Come on, Annabeth told me. I'll show you the volleyball court. I've already seen it. Come on. She grabbed my wrist and dragged me outside. I could hear the other kids of cabin 11 laughing behind me. When we were a few feet away, Annabeth said, Jackson, you have to be better than that. What? She rolled her eyes and mumbled under her breath, I can't believe I thought you were the one. What's your problem? I was getting angry now. All I know is I kill some bull guy. Don't talk like that, Annabeth said. You know how many kids at this camp wished they'd had your chance to get killed? To fight a Minotaur? What do you think we trained for? I shook my head. Look, if the thing I fought really was the Minotaur, the same one from the stories, yes. Then there's only one, yes. And he died like a gazillion years ago, right? Theseus killed him in the labyrinth, so monsters don't die, Percy. They can't be killed. They can be killed, but they don't die. Oh, thanks. That clears it up. They don't have souls like you and me. They can dispel them for a while. You can dispel them for a while, maybe even for the whole lifetime if you're lucky. But they are primal forces. Chiron calls them archetypes. Eventually they reform. I thought about Miss Dodds. You mean if I killed one accidentally with a sword? Your math teacher? That's right, she's still out there. You just made her very, very mad. How did you know about Miss Dodds? You talk in your sleep. You almost called her something. A furry? They're Hades torturers, right? Annabeth glanced nervously at the ground as if she was expecting it to open up and swallow her. You shouldn't call them by name, even here. We call them the kindly ones, if we have to speak of them at all. Look, is there anything we can say without it thundering? I sounded whiny, even to myself, but right now I didn't care. Why do I even have to stay in cabin 11? Why is everybody so crowded together? There are plenty of empty books right over there. I pointed to the first few cabins. And Annabeth turned pale. You don't just choose a cabin, Percy. It depends on who your parents are, or your parent. She stared at me, waiting for me to get it. My mom is Sally Jackson, I said. She works at a candy store in Grand Central Station. At least she used to. I'm sorry about your mom, Percy, but that's not what I mean. I'm talking about your other parent, your dad. He's dead. I never knew him. Annabeth sighed. Clearly she'd been through this conversation with other kids. Your father's not dead, Percy. How can you say that? You know him? Of course not. Then how can you say... Because I know you. You wouldn't be here if you weren't one of us. You don't know anything about me, no? She raised an eyebrow. I bet you moved around from school to school. I bet you were kicked out a lot of them. How? Diagnosed with dyslexia? Probably ADHD too? I tried to swallow my embarrassment. What does that have to do with anything? Taken together, it's almost a sure sign. The letters float off the page when you try to read them, right? That's because your mind is hardwired for ancient Greek. In the ADHD, you're impulsive. You can't sit still in a classroom. That's your battlefield reflexes. In a real fight, they'd keep you alive. As for the attention problems, that's because you see too much, Percy, not too little. Your senses are better than regular mortals. Of course your teachers wanted you medicated. Most of them are monsters. They don't want you seeing them for what they are. You sound like you went through the same thing. Most of the kids here did. If you weren't like us, you couldn't have survived the Minotaur, much less in the ambrosia and nectar. Ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink we are giving to you to make you better. The stuff that would have killed a normal kid. It would have turned your blood into fire and your bones to sand. You would have been dead. Face it, you're a half-blood. A half-blood. I was reeling with so many questions, I didn't know where to start. Then a husky voice yelled, "Well, a newbie." I looked over. The big girl from the ugly red cabin was sauntering toward us. She had 3 other girls behind her, all big and ugly and mean, looking like they were wearing camo jackets. "Clarice," Annabeth sighed. "Why don't you go polish your spear or something?" "Sure, Miss Princess," the big one said, "so I can run you through with it on Friday." "Ire es korakos," Annabeth said, which I somehow understood was Greek for "go to the crows," though I had a feeling it was worse curse than it sounded. "You don't stand a chance." We'll pulverize you," Clarice said, but her eye twitched. Perhaps she wasn't sure she could follow through on the threat. She turned to me. "Who's this little runt?" "Percy Jackson," Annabeth said. "Meet Clarice, daughter of Ares." I blinked. "Like the war god?" Clarice sneered. "You got a problem with that?" "No," I said, recovering from my wits. "It explains the bad smell." Clarice growled. "You've got an initiation ceremony for you newbies, Percy. Whatever, come on, I'll show you." "Clarice," Annabeth tried to say. "Stay out of it, wise girl." Annabeth looked pained, but she did stay out of it, and I didn't really want her help. I was the new kid. I had to earn my own rep. I handed Annabeth my Minotaur's horn and got ready for a fight, but before I knew it, Clarice had me by the neck and was dragging me toward a cinder block building that I knew immediately was the bathroom. I was kicking and punching. I had been in plenty of fights before, but this big girl Clarice had hands like iron. She dragged me into the girls' bathroom, and there was a line of toilets on one side and a line of shower stalls down the other. It smelled just like any other public bathroom, and I was thinking, as much as I could think, with Clarice gripping my hair out, as that if this place belonged to the gods, they should have been able to afford classier Johns. Clarice's friends were all laughing, and I was trying to find the strength I'd used to fight the Minotaur, but it just wasn't there. Like he's big 3 material. "Yeah, right. Minotaur probably fell over laughing. He's so stupid," Clarice said as she pushed me towards one of the toilets. Her friend snickered. Annabeth stood in the corner watching through her fingers. Clarice bent me over my knees, started pushing my head towards the toilet bowl. It reeked like rusted pipes and, well, like what goes through toilets. I strained to keep my head up. I was looking at the scummy water, thinking, I will not go into that. I won't. Then something happened. I felt a tug in the pit of my stomach. I heard the plumbing rumble, the pipes shudder, and Clarice's grip on my hair loosened. Water shot out of the toilet, making an arch straight over my head, and the next thing I knew, I was sprawled on the bathroom tiles with Clarice screaming behind me. I turned just as water blasted out of the toilet again, hitting Clarice straight in the face so hard it pushed her down on her butt. The water stayed on her like the spray from fire hose, pushing her backwards into the shower stall. She struggled, gasping, and her friends started coming towards her, but then all the other toilets exploded too, and 6 more streams of toilet water blasted them back. The showers acted up too, and together all the fixtures sprays the camouflage girls right out of the bathroom, spinning them around like pieces of garbage being washed away. As soon as they were out of the door, I felt a tug in my gut lessen, and the water shut off as quickly as it had started. The entire bathroom was flooded, and Annabeth hadn't been spared. She was dripping wet, and she hadn't been pushed out the door. She was standing in exactly the same place, staring at me in shock. I looked down and realized I was sitting in the only dry spot in the whole room. There was a circle of dry floor around me. I didn't have one single drop of water on my clothes. Nothing. I stood up, my legs shaky. Annabeth said, "How did you—" "I don't know." We walked to the door. Outside, Clarice and her friends were sprawled in the mud, and a bunch of other campers had gathered to gawk. Clarice's hair was flattened across her face. Her camouflage jacket was sopping, and she smelled like sewage. She gave me a look of absolute hatred. "You were dead, new boy. You were totally dead." I probably should have let it go, But I said, "You want to gargle with toilet water again, Clarice? Close your mouth." Her friends had to hold her back. They dragged her towards cabin 5 while the other campers made a way to avoid her flailing feet. Annabeth stared at me. I couldn't tell whether she was grossed out or angry at me for dousing her. "What?" I demanded. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," she said, "that I want you on my team for Capture the Flag." Okay. Thank you guys for joining me for Chapter 6. I hope you join me next time for Chapter 7, which is called My Dinner Goes Up in Smoke.